some of the rulings that we can extract or we can take from that? Okay, it was warm out, right? So he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he refused it because it was an easier way to cool off and to kind of keep the water on you. What are some other reasons? Interesting. That was the last opinion. So I think you remember the latest that we had spoken about. We had said that there's a difference in, some of the scholars said there's a difference between wudu and ghusl. For wudu, you don't dry yourself, and for ghusl, you do. Some of them said that it is just something that is recommended, that he sallallahu alayhi wasallam would use this. It's recommended not to use a towel to dry oneself off. And we said that he sallallahu alayhi wasallam, what did he do? Because obviously he wasn't walking around soaked. So what is it that he sallallahu alayhi wasallam used to do? He used to take the water and he would just kind of, wipe it off with his hands, and whatever was left from that, he would allow it. Another possibility that Imam Nawawi doesn't mention here, which I'm kind of surprised, is the fact that wudu is a worship, right? It's a type of worship, and the water that is used is blessed, right? Because you're using it to purify oneself, you're using it to clean yourself, and leaving some of that water is a way to leave some of that blessing and to leave some of that barakah and some of the effects of that. Interestingly enough, Imam Tirmidhi, he says, لا يصح في هذا الباب عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم شيء. He says that concerning this chapter and concerning this issue of not drying oneself after making wudu, he said there's nothing authentic established on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's the opinion that he, rahimahullah, holds concerning this. وقد احتج بعض العلماء على إباحة التنشيف بقول ميمونة في هذا الحديث وجعل يقول بالماء هكذا يعني بنفضه. Okay, so some of scholars, they respond, they say, well, in the same hadith, if it was just a problem of drying oneself off, removing water, then he would not have done nafth either, and he would not wiped off the water. So that is proof enough that an individual can do that. Or if he sallallahu alayhi wasallam, if he removed water in this way and he felt he was dry enough that he didn't actually need to use the towel to dry himself any further. Does that make sense? And I think that's the last concerning this. Also, the word mindil is used. Mindil is basically like, you can say like a towel or a cloth. So I would imagine that they would have dedicated cloth, to be used in different ways. So bodily fluids are always there, right? So whether somebody has mucus, whether an individual uses the bathroom, you will find different ways to dry oneself. You'll find different ways to clean oneself. We're going to come to a hadith about when they finish their cycle, when they finish their menstrual cycle, they would actually have cloth that they would wear during their menstrual cycle. I think that we discussed some of the hadith. Very similar to nowadays, obviously they don't have special clothing for that. What do they tend to use? They tend to use like sanitary napkins, or they'll use tampons, or they'll use pads, right? There's always something special to help them kind of catch the blood while they're on their cycles. So I think using these things is not something that's uncommon. These are things that we still use today, and we still obviously the way these manifest in our time is very different than how they did in theirs, but they would always have separate cloths, they would have separate items of clothing, they would have ways to kind of differentiate. Another example of this is like now, for babies, what is the common thing that all babies wear? Diapers, right? They didn't have, it's not like you could go back in time where you could just wear stuff and throw it away. Like, why are we able to use diapers? Why do we have sanitary napkins? Why is it that we have tampons? Why is it that we have pads? Like, why do these things exist? Because they're disposable. And why can we dispose them? How come we don't just use cloth for everything? Okay, well, sanitation is one argument. I think less people are concerned about things that are biodegradable. I wish everybody was very conscious of it. Convenience is a big part of it, right? And not just convenience, right? So I think we all have a threshold to convenience, in the sense that now they sell robots, for example, right? How come we all don't have robots in our home? They're really expensive, right? They're out of most people's price range, and it's not practical. They're not particularly good, at what they do. They can do certain actions and certain things. Right. It all boils down to cost effectiveness, right? The reason that we have these tools and the reason that we use them is because it's worth the purchase. Like we're willing to invest in these things because we know that we throw it away. And in other parts of the world, do they use diapers? Do they use sanitary napkins? Right, they use cloth. Why? Not because it's not sanitary, right? Because it's not an issue of sanitation at this point. It's because they can't afford diapers, right? And if it's more expensive, it's actually cheaper to use cloth. And why is it cheaper to use cloth? Because I can just reuse it, right? So these are things that are important to keep in mind. Even when we talk about, in general, like how the Eastern world and the Western world kind of deals with things, the moment that something breaks in my home today, what do? I call someone. That's possible. Even worse than that. No, I wish, huh? And so usually in our culture, what do? We'll replace it, right? Like we won't. It's not often that we'll actually fix something. Usually we'll just replace it. And even if you look at cars, for example, so if I have a part of a car, right? If I have a part of a car, let's say that this is the half shaft. And for those of you that know, it goes from the transmission to the wheel. And what does it do? It causes the wheel to spin. Sometimes these break. Usually what does a mechanic do? He'll buy a new one and replace it. He won't what? He won't fix this one. You can. Why don't we fix it? Because the cost of labor. In the Eastern world, they're actually going to spend time to fix it. Why? Because labor is cheap. And a lot of times, like people will be like, okay, well, why do we import stuff from here and why do we purchase stuff from there? You don't have a drastic difference in the cost of consumable goods. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so like wheat and like wood, brick, steel, like it's not very different, the cost of these things around the world. So why is it that we import stuff from China or from Vietnam or from other places in the world? Because the cost of labor it's much cheaper. It's not just cheap, it's much cheaper. Here in the United States, we have a minimum wage, right? There's a federal minimum wage and it's like, what, $7 something? In most parts of the world, it's like 30 cents, right? Like, or 3 cents or like 5 cents. If you work out like the hourly on how much people are actually earning and getting. So if I have to pay like 3 cents an hour or 7 cents an hour, it makes more, right? So what am I going to do? I'm going to try to save as many products as I can. Now, historically, it wasn't convenient for them to produce cloth, right? It takes time. Like even historically, you have a loom and it takes time to make like, these pieces of cloth. And then there's labor that's involved in like sewing them. You don't have this mass production of things. Like mass production is after the Industrial Revolution, right? This is more of like a modern phenomenon, which is why we're able to have so many disposable things, like which is why we don't reuse things, which is why it's cheaper to produce something new than it is to fix something old. Even the way things are designed now. When was the last time you guys repaired a laptop? Right, never. Right, I would say repairing was maybe popular up until 10 years ago. Right, if that, yeah. Right, it's just you just get a new one. A lot of people, the other thing that we do, another service that we have here in the United States that the rest of the world doesn't really use is like extended warranties. Like how many of us have extended warranties on products? And so that if something breaks, what do? They usually don't fix it, they what? They'll just give you a new one. Car accidents, what happens? Right, they just buy you, it's cheaper for them to buy you a new car, right, and pay it off. So I think there are a lot of cultural differences in how things work, but historically it kind of gives us an idea, right? Like if you have these restraints, it makes sense on why you would have these types of uses. So did they have dedicated towels and things like that? I would imagine that they did. But if I don't use the towel, it increases the longevity of that towel. Would you agree? Right, so if I avoid using something, because at the end of the day, if I have a piece of clothing, I want that clothing to last as long as possible, right? I don't want things to wear out because getting another one is actually far pricier than trying to keep and trying to hold on to this one. Does that help kind of get an idea of like what was going on and how they kind of live their lives? It's for us, we can be like, oh, if it seems very difficult, it seems very challenging. The needs were also very different, like in different societies. If I'm if I have like access to to regular trade, the cost of goods was relatively stable, right? Inflation is not to say that inflation didn't happen historically, but what's the big difference from the time of the Prophet ﷺ and today, in terms of how come things, when we look at their economy, things seemed a lot more stable? Why is there so much fluctuation today? No, the Jews were there, right? And they practiced usury. And the Prophet ﷺ did business with them. So that wasn't an issue. That was there. It existed. I'm sorry. What was the reserve system that they had? What currency did they use? Well, that was for bartering. They used gold. The gold. Where did they get the gold from? They got it from war would be a part of it, right? But if you have a fixed currency in circulation, what happens to the value of that currency? It's very stable, right? It doesn't change too much. And today, so for example, right? It was a commodity system. And today, what kind of system do we live in? We live in a fiat system. So a fiat system is paper money. What's the difference between the two, essentially?
One is a fixed control.
Yeah.
You know exactly how much good you have. Fiat, you can theoretically, right?
Right. So in a fiat system, the thing that I can do that I can't do in a commodity system, like in gold and silver, I can't just make more gold out of thin air. Right? I can't just make more silver out of thin air. Right? But in a fiat paper system, what can I do? I could just print more. So 5 years ago, I could get a burger for like maybe $5. Is that fair? Can I find a burger for less than $10 today? Right. So did the value of that burger, did it double? Right. So the value of my money actually weakened. It wasn't because. Can we all argue and be like, yo, hamburgers have gotten so much better, right? They're so amazing now. Before hamburgers were weak, but today, mashallah, hamburgers are amazing, right? That's not the case. Commodities are still, exactly. So when I have things like wheat, it's generally fixed, right? I can only produce so much wheat every year unless I come up with some amazing technology. I can only produce so much steel every year. I can only pump out so much oil every year, right? I have limited control in these things. But paper, I can print, right? I can just print as much paper as I want, which is why we have the price of things is actually going up. It's not because eggs have gotten so much better, right? It's not because bread is more amazing. It's because the value of that paper is actually decreased. So when I live in this society where things are stable, right? So the advantage of having a commodity society is that the price of things is relatively stable. I can go through my whole life and there will be slight fluctuations depending on the availability of grain, depending on the availability of dates, right? But in general, if we're not in a situation where it's a drought, if we're not in a situation where like a famine, I'm not going to feel affected. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down, I'm not going to feel affected. And what happens in a stable economy? People aren't afraid to. They're not afraid to spend, right? If I know things are generally good and things are generally stable, and I know I can rely on XYZ currency, people aren't afraid to spend. But when people see a lot of fluctuation in the market, what do we tend to do?
Generally, if there's high volatility,
Yeah. Right, so you hold on to your money, right? So if I see things going crazy, I'm not going to give up my money because I'm going to wait and see until things kind of stabilize and I see where things go. This is the economy of the Prophet ﷺ. This is the economy of the companions. This continued for a number of years and it continued under different khulafa, continued under different regimes, it continued under different empires. And you have this relative stability when it comes to wealth. The interesting thing is the Arabs didn't mine their own gold. They didn't mine their own silver. So where did they get the gold and silver from? So the Persians, their currency was silver.
and the Romans.
Not Africa, the Romans, right? So the Romans, their currency was mainly gold, and the Persians, their currency was mainly silver. So this is how these two currencies worked, and this is because they did trade with them. what they would do is they would take their goods, they would go and they would get these rare metals and they would use those to exchange and make purchases. But that's generally the economy during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is why it's important to keep in mind this the scarcity mindset. Like, what is a scarcity mindset? That once I have a product or I have something, I'm going to do the best that I can to preserve it, right? Because I don't want to buy new products and I don't want to spend more money.
So do you think that's relatively why, obviously great, because the Prophet was constrained to just the peninsula itself and the borders.
Yeah.
But do you think that's also why Allah didn't instruct him to go out and fight the Persians and the Romans early, even after the reconquest?
I don't think he had the manpower. Because even when the Ghazwat al-Tabuk, it was more of a show of force than it was a attempt to invade the Roman Empire. Because the army of the Muslims, you guys know how large it was at Tabuk? So it was like between 7,000 and 10,000, right? It wasn't that many people, and the army of the Romans was how large? Right, it was like 3 to 10 times greater than that. All they did, it was just meant to be a show of force. Because what happened? Khalid bin Walid, he was like the 4th general in line, right? All the first 3 generals, they were martyred. He comes in, and what happens? Right, he changes the dynamics, he changes the tactics, and he's actually able to push back against the Roman legion. And he pushes back against the Roman legion. Eventually, what happens? Right, they retreat, not like a full retreat, but like, right, they pull back. And then at that point, they're like, okay, hey, listen, these aren't just a bunch of, they're not just a bunch of pushovers. They're not just like these disorganized Arab Bedouins who don't know how to fight. They're starting to see there's military tactics. Is it worth for us to engage with a bunch of desert people to not gain anything? Are you guys following what I'm saying? Because if I want to send a show of force, like as the Roman Empire, what am I going to do? Is like, okay, you know what? I'm going to send the full force of my army against you, just so that I can subjugate you. I want you guys to see how powerful and how strong we are. And if I send them, and I as a general, I'm like, okay, hey, listen, the emperor is sending me here as the show of force, and now I'm getting pushed back from like these guys who like they don't have like proper uniforms, they don't have any like, and I'm starting to see like military tactics from them. What am I going to do?
You're going to have a lot more casualties.
And it's like, is it worth it for me to get these casualties at this point? And I'm looking behind them, and what am I seeing? All I'm seeing is desert, right? Like I'm not seeing this like, okay, hey, this is actually conquerable land that I can invest in. That even if I take it, and if I come back to the emperor and I tell him like, hey, we lost like 10,000 or we lost 15,000 soldiers engaging with this band of these desert dwellers, what is the emperor going to do with them?
His response is, what did you get?
Yeah, like, yeah, exactly. It's like, what did you get? Did you get them to bend the knee, right? Did you get them to submit to you? Did you get this? Did you get land? Did you get like, did you get some type of treaty that you completed with them? So for him at that point, it's like, okay, no, these guys are far more tactical than I imagined them to be. So what do? You're like, you just pull back. You're like, okay, you know what? I'm cut my losses. I'm going to leave. This is not worth it. But it also is now it sends a message to Rome that, yeah, right there, this is a formidable force, and if we're going to come at them, and if this is something we really want to engage in, we have to be more tactical. We can't just we can't just show up with a show of force. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
None of the explanations mentioned that he refused the towel because he wanted to preserve the cloth.
Wallahu alam. So when it comes to explanations of a hadith, or when it comes to dealing, and the thing is, this I'll go into some of the other explanations and see what they say about the hadith. But at the end of the day, if you have somebody who's sitting down and he's authoring a work, and he's read a number of different works, and what he's done is like he's gotten some ideas, and we've heard in different places and spaces where he's like, okay, Qadi Iyad said this about this, and this scholar said this about this, and he from himself, what'll he do? He'll add his own additions, and he'll be like, okay, these are some of the benefits I took from the hadith, these are some of the things that I noticed, these are some of the things that I took away. Does that mean that there can't be gaps in the explanation? No. Right? There can be gaps, right? It's a human effort. And with human efforts, like you'll always have these gaps. And just because he spent time like thinking about it, it doesn't mean that he thought about every single angle concerning that. Does that make sense?
I mean, but basically,
Yeah.
none of the explanations that were put forward
They were
make
not,
sense.
yeah,
This is the most plausible one.
sure. And it's like, okay, yeah, you know, I can imagine this, or like I think about that. And sometimes you can have gaps in knowledge, right? So even if you have someone as illustrious and someone as amazing as Imam Nawawi, there can be gaps to his knowledge. Sometimes he's not able to see that. And not just that, I actually find it amazing the amount of detail he goes into concerning like a woman's menstrual cycle and her anatomy for somebody who's unmarried. It's actually shocking. It's like, and when we get into some of the later discussions, I'm just like, wait, why? Like, you know, where did you even come across this? Where did you read about this? But it doesn't mean that he'll think back and be like, okay, hey, listen, did they have a scarcity mindset, right? You know what I mean? Sometimes the mind won't even wander in that direction, saying like, okay, hey, listen, maybe there's a scarcity mindset. Maybe he didn't want to ruin the towel. Maybe, you know, maybe he was scared that, I forgot who brought the towel to him. Oh, Maymuna. So the part of it could also be like if Maymuna gave him the towel and he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he dried himself with that towel and he gave it back to her, how would people view the towel? Yes or no? Right, just imagine. The Prophet, this is the towel that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam dried himself with. How would the companions deal with that? It would become a sacred object automatically. Like, just imagine any of us. If someone said to us and told us, and we were with the Prophet ﷺ, and someone said, hey, listen, this is the towel of the Prophet ﷺ, what would we all fight to do?
For the towel.
Like, we would fight for the towel. Like, we would fight for the towel. And would I ever wash that towel? No. I would never wash that towel, right? This is something I would hold on to as a sacred object for myself. And if I used it like to dry myself, then that would be the specific towel that I use. So is it a possibility? Yeah. I'm sorry?
He washed his own clothing. Right?
Sure. So there are times where, so the hadith you're mentioning about he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he used to manage his own house and he used to do a lot of these own things. Yes. But there were times where like he had a servant also, right? And he had wives. I can't imagine them just sitting and doing nothing all day because, oh yeah, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam will you know what I mean?
What I mean is they would wash that towel.
Yeah.
They're not going to keep it.
Yeah.
There's fairness, right? You actually think about it like the Prophet some like what to go off of near the Kaaba, people would never go, right? People like go
No, and people find the place where he saw some, in like Ibn Umar radiallahu anh, there was a tree that he saw some used to pass under. When the tree was cut down, what did he do? He continued ducking his head down because he's like, this is where the Prophet ﷺ used to duck his head. He used to think of and remember and ask, you know, did the Prophet ﷺ used to walk through here? And what would he do? He would try to walk in those places. Again, just following the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and just taking the blessings of where he was. So are there companions who might take a more practical approach? Yeah, 100%. Are there companions who would collect his sweat and use it as perfume? Yes, they did, right? Like, so you have different people dealing with him in different ways. There are companions that he saw he would drink from a place, and what would they do? Right, they would look for the place where he put his mouth, and what would they would do? They would want to match it, you know, just to take his blessing, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, like I said, are there companions, his wives, you know, people who maybe live with him every day? That level of sanctity would not be maybe as high with them because they deal with him every single day, right? Even Aisha radiallahu anha, when she would clean his clothes, right? We have very clear hadith that we just took recently where she would remove like the ejaculate from his sallallahu alaihi wasallam's clothing. She didn't try to save it, right? She was like, no, this is not something that should be saved. And she took a very practical approach to it and trying to remove it and using some water and in different narrations to actually wash it. So I think that you do have maybe people from his home, his servants who dealt with his daily use items in a way where they didn't treat it with the same type of sanctity versus somebody who is not as, doesn't have as a regular contact with him. Like, yeah, the same level of accessibility. And it's like, okay, that is the case. The situations where he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like where he cut his nails and he told the companion, he said, hey, listen, go throw this away. What did he do? He said, go hide this somewhere. Like, go throw it away, put it in a place where nobody has access to it. He consumed them. Yeah. Like he can. Why did he consume? Again, he was like, this is something that's blessed, and he sallallahu alaihi wasallam is telling me to put it in a place where nobody has access to. Okay, where's the best place that nobody has access to? My stomach, right? You know what I'm saying? Because again, did every companion, number one, I think this is an important question too. Did every companion, was every single one of them as intelligent as the next? No, right? I'm saying, listen, you had people who were very intelligent. You had people who caught on very quickly. You had people who had understanding from the Prophet ﷺ. The moment that he would start saying something, they knew exactly where it was going. And this was Umar radiallahu anh, very sharp, extremely sharp. He would understand things. He would say, okay, because of this ruling, I foresee this happening, I foresee that happening. Okay, what about this? Prophet says, Ya Rasulullah, hey Rasulullah, I think you should keep your wives in this way. And then the verses about him ﷺ keeping his wives separate so that people don't fall into fitna, right? You had people like that. And then you had people who would come to him ﷺ and they're like, Ya Rasulullah, I kept a white thread and a black thread under my pillow, waiting for Fajr to come in. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّن لَكَ الْخَيْطِ الْأَبْيَضُ مِنَ الْخَيْطِ الْأَسْوَدِ. Right? So until the white thread becomes clear from the black thread. He took it very what? He took it extremely literally. You have people who are of that level and that intelligence. And, yeah, I'm saying, because is Islam for professors? It's for everyone, right? So the layman, his engagement with the Quran and his engagement from the Sunnah, it's going to be very different from somebody who is more intelligent, somebody who's more educated, somebody who has a greater grasp of certain things. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, مَن يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. Yani whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intends good for, He gives him understanding of the religion. There are things that he will see, there are things that she will see that maybe other people don't see. But this person who has a very basic, superficial understanding of things, is he doing anything wrong? No, not at all. And not just that, his understanding, his level of pondering, it's going to be very different from somebody who has a far deeper understanding of things. Yes or no? He's going to be judged according to his level, and he's going to be judged according to his. Just like there are multiple situations, we talk about it often, about when he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, he sent the companions to Bani Qurayza. He says, لا تصلين أحدكم حتى تصلوا بني قريظة. He said, not a single one of you should absolutely not pray until they reach Bani Qurayza. And some of the companions, even with all that, absolutely don't, you must, all of that, even some of them were like, dude, he didn't mean to go, to actually go and pray there. We're missing Asr. The sun is about to set. This is not, we can't just leave the prayer. So what did they do? They stopped and they prayed. Other ones, they took the hadith very superficially. Yes? They said, no, he said it, therefore, we have to execute. We have to execute it the way he said it. Right? Yeah, Maghrib came in and they prayed. And when they came back to the Prophet ﷺ, what did he do? He just smiled. He didn't say either of them, you were right or you were right. And that has continued until this day, where you have those who will lean more toward the spirit of the law, and there are more of those who will lean toward the letter of the law. And that's fine, right? You're always going to have these different types of people. What should we not do? These people should never criticize them, and these people should never criticize them. And what do we call that in modern context? We call these people more conservative, and we call these people more liberal. That's fine, right? You have to have a gradient of people. If the companions can have a gradient, and the Prophet ﷺ can tolerate, then what about us? We should be more tolerant. If he ﷺ can look at a people and give them instructions, and some of them understand something, and others understand something, and he's okay with it, why do we have a problem? So, like I said, when it comes to looking at these hadith, sometimes we can come up with, I'm saying, is it possible for me to take away benefits in things that weren't mentioned in previous books? Yeah, I think so. 100%, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Why? Because I'm still, the one thing I'm not doing, I'm not changing the ruling. Either it's going to be recommended for me not to dry myself, and that's a possibility, or the other is no, this has nothing to do with being recommended or disliked. This is just a preference of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And both of these are reasonable understandings. Now, why is that? Like coming into the mechanics of things and understanding the why behind them, that door is always going to be open. Does that make sense? Like understanding the reasonings behind things, that door is always going to be open. A very parallel conversation to this can be like, okay, well, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibit pork? But I'm saying, all of these things are what? They're mental exercises. Do you have a clear text? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I prohibit pork because XYZ. You have that for certain things. So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why does He prohibit alcohol? Because it prohibits sound judgment, right? So anything that prohibits sound judgment is now prohibited. But when it comes to pork, you can argue it's a dirty animal, the trichinosis, there are some there's characteristics that it has, and characteristics are known to pass on from the things that we consume, and that expresses in the way that we are. And that's fine, right? There's nothing wrong with any of those things. But at the end of the day, can I say concretely that any of these are specific reasons that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited because of this? No, right? These are all just, again, they're mental exercises. And it's the same thing here. Why did the Prophet ﷺ do this? These are mental exercises. That door is open until Yawm al-Qiyamah. And that is the space where we're allowed to discuss. Yes?
Does music fall into the spirit of music and literally no music like instruments? Is it the same, or is that?
That's a different discussion, and that has to do with, and I don't mind getting into the discussion, but basically the issue is like, okay, number one, how do we determine prohibitions in Islam? Right? We start with the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, right? Both of these, I would look to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I look at the Prophet ﷺ says, and say, okay, hey, listen, what are the things that are prohibited? And in general, what are those prohibitions that are very clear that we have 100%? Lying, stealing, backbiting, murder, zina. Any differences on these? Okay. So now the question comes around, are there things that are additional from those? Yeah. And that's where you're going to have a difference of opinion. But anything that you don't have 100% clarity on its prohibition, what does that mean? Now you have room for differences of opinion. Is music one of those categories? Yes, it is. Why? Because I don't have a clear text where the Prophet ﷺ is saying music is prohibited. And if you have anything that is clear to that extent, all of number one, there's nothing in the Quran. Secondly, in the hadith that talk about it to that extent, all of those hadith are weak. The strongest hadith is in Bukhari, and even Imam Bukhari, he mentions the hadith that is not up to his own standard, and the reason we know that is because it's not something that's muttasil, meaning that every time Imam Bukhari inserts a hadith into his Sahih, he shows the entire connected chain from him to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In this hadith, he doesn't bring a connected chain. So automatically that tells us what? That this is not according to Imam Bukhari's standard. Does that mean that the hadith can still be sahih? Yes, it does. But Imam Bukhari, he doesn't feel that it fits his standard. The second question is, okay, tayyib, if we assume that it's sound, can I use it to establish prohibition? That's the question. Imam Bukhari himself, how does he use this hadith? Do you know? He uses it to show the prohibition of alcohol. It's under a different heading. And if he meant to show the prohibition of music, well, why wouldn't he just put it under that chapter? If that was his intention, why wouldn't he just mention that? So these are things to think about. And like I said, and these are very introductory arguments. I have plenty more concerning this issue. I think music is fine. I think music has the same prohibition as speech. I don't think there's any difference, right? So the things that are prohibited for me to say, they're also prohibited me to sing about. Does that make sense? I think one is the extension of another. Now, do some scholars prohibit instruments and things like that? Yeah, absolutely. But all of them are based on this hadith. Like everything revolves around this hadith, which in and of itself is not clear on the prohibition. How some scholars have understood it? Yes, sure. But at the end of the day, anybody can come to me and blah, blah, blah. All I have to ask them is one question is like, is there khilaf? Is there a difference of opinion on this subject? And if someone says to me, yes, there's a difference of opinion, okay, then you have no right to impose your opinion on me. That's it, conversation's over. You don't want to listen to it, you don't want to engage with it, you don't want it in your home, and you don't want to play it for your kids. That is completely 100% your right. And I'm not here to tell you, like, no, you have to play music, right? You have to play music in your home. That's where we're going to have a level of understanding. It's like where I don't impose on each other. And if I know he's coming to visit with me or he's going to ride with me and I know he's not comfortable with it, what should I do as a Muslim? No, play it, right? Out of respect for him. Is it not because I feel it's prohibited, but it's like, okay, no, out of respect of him, for him, I'm not going to. And you have similar conversations around a lot of different things. Yes, totally. Bani Qurayza. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, yeah. No, and their rationalization was like, okay, no. He didn't want us to miss the prayer. He just wanted us to hurry. Yeah, to hurry up. And the other ones, they said, no, listen, the Prophet ﷺ, they said it. I don't care about what the reason is. If he said it, I have to follow it like he said it. Yes, Ahmed. And that's fine, right? So if you're talking about foul language, foul subjects, right? Language that is maybe accusatory or something that is not appropriate, like in the way that you present it, I'm fine with that. But the same rules apply to what? To when I'm speaking too. So I don't think they're any different. And even people will say, oh, okay, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He prevents lahul hadith. Okay, that's talking about speech. It's not talking. Right? It's not talking about music. The same prohibitions apply, and does that mean that we're also prohibited from speaking? No. Yeah. Makruh. Yes. Yeah. So the thing is, again, there are levels to all of this, right? So if, for example, I use a swear or I use a curse word, there are different ways because it's just language, right? These are just words. The question then comes is like, okay, is there a level of prohibition that comes in? I believe there is. What is that prohibition if I point something at you? Right? So if I use a curse word against you, I believe that is haram. Why? Because I'm hurting someone, not because of the language. Now, if I stub my toe and I'm like OS or OF, you know what I mean? Like let's take the language very foul. If I said OF, is this targeted toward anyone? No. In this situation, I would say it's disliked. Right? And should a Muslim speak like that regularly and normally? No, it's not, right? So because if I engage in a lot of disliked things, right? If I engage a lot of disliked things, I don't take care of my hygiene, right? I don't dress appropriately. I use a lot of foul language. What do I end up doing? Well, that's possible. I can't guarantee that for anyone, but let's say that these are some of the characteristics that I have, right? Like I have poor language, people are going to stay away from me, right? So if this is something that I practice, if I use a lot of foul language, I don't dress well, I don't smell nice, I'm not doing anything haram, but because I'm doing a series of things that are disliked, not only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but to who? But to other people as well. Right? Like people don't like that. People don't like being around such a person. So what do? They'll slowly remove themselves. And again, it's not necessary that this person is doing anything haram, but he's not doing anything to better his relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he's not doing anything to better his relationship with others. Right? So it's always better to err on the side of caution. And why is something makruh? Because we should what? We should avoid it. Right? What is the big difference between makruh and haram? Right? I'm prohibited from it. In makruh, I should avoid it. Right? These are the two differences. So there's an absolute staying away from, and then there's an avoiding of something. And why? Because I want to drift toward things that are good, meaning that if I do the opposite of that, if I speak with good language, that is something that is recommended. Right? And that's something I'll get rewarded for. So it's always important to kind of keep these minds, because when we have an idea of what actual limits are, many times when we're discussing with each other, many times when we're discussing with others, and even when we're discussing with our children, someone might be like, okay, well, why can't you just tell people it's haram? Okay, why can't I do that? If someone said to me, no, Sheikh, you have to say cursing is haram. You have to say swearing is haram. Why can't I do that? No, number one, it's not truthful, right? It's not being religiously honest. What else? Okay, what are the consequences of that? What if someone be like, no, well, out of safety, you know what I mean? Like, if you can prevent people from doing it, what's the big deal?
You're held accountable.
I'm held accountable for lying, for sure. What else?
I mean, a lot of things become haram, that is
And the thing is, and if everything becomes haram, then what happens? Nothing becomes haram. And when I actually say something is haram, how much value does it have? Right? It doesn't have a lot of value. I remember I was doing a fatwa session where, like, you know, people submit questions, and somebody asked me about smoking, and I was like, I think it's makruh, I think it's disliked, and they're like, but Sheikh, it's unhealthy. Like, why don't you say it's haram? And I was like, okay, well, I was like, what do you think about Doritos? And he was like, well, they're unhealthy. I was like, okay. I said, just because something is unhealthy doesn't make it haram. And I said, you can argue other things, like, okay, yeah, there's a smell and there's this and that, but I have no problem. I agree with you 100%. But the more honest I am on these issues with people, the more, when something actually becomes haram, what happens? They'll actually believe me, and there'll be some gravity in their heart. So if someone comes to me and be like, you know, like, is it okay for me to lie here? It's like, no, lying is haram, yaqi. Then what happens? All of a sudden it has gravity and it actually has weight in their heart. Making things obligated for people. The other question he had, he was like, okay, well, what about praying in congregation? Like, if I came to pray salah in the masjid in congregation, like, what is the ruling? I was like, it's sunnah. And he was like, what do you mean? The people will stop praying in the masjid. I said, so you're telling me all of these people are only here because it's an obligation? And I said, you think that people have been praying in the masjid for the past 1400 years because they all believed it was an obligation? People come to the masjid because they want to. People come to the masjid because they're encouraged to. People come to the masjid because your rewards are multiplied. I said, but you think that people who are praying in their homes, people who are praying at work, people who are praying, you know, in different situations, that they're going to be punished? And that there's a sin upon them if they pray by themselves? I was like, does that make sense? So I said we have to be religiously honest. Like, we have to be academically honest. We can't just start making things haram and making things halal. That's not how it works. We have to be very, very clear in those things. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لِمَا تَقُولُوا مَا تَصِفُ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ هَذَا حَلَالٌ وَهَذَا حَرَامٌ افتراء على الله الكذب. He says that don't describe things as halal and haram with your tongues. Don't say that, because this is iftira. SubhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know what word He uses? He uses the word extremism. He said this is extremism. This is going beyond all bounds. And this is extremism and lying against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like, we have to be very careful. Even the scholar, like even our ai*imma, they were very shy to use the words haram and wajib. They're very shy. They would use things like disliked. They would use things like recommended, right? They wouldn't use those strong terms. The only time that they would use those terms, if something was clear in the Quran or clear in the Sunnah. That's it. That's the only time. They would say, for example, 5 daily prayers, if you ask them, would they say it's recommended? No. They would say it's an obligation. Why? Because it's clear in the Quran. Zakat, obligation. Lying, haram, right? We need to bring that back, right? That's where we need to, so that we as a community, we as individuals, we as parents, like, we learn to, like, help our children kind of develop that gradient, help our community develop that gradient, help our friends, help each other, like, develop that gradient, right? These things are really important, because when something becomes an obligation, what's going to happen? Like, our antennas are going to stand up, and we're going to make sure that that is something that we hold in major and high importance. When something is a prohibition, no, our antennas are going to stand up. We're going to be like, okay, no, this is something I need to absolutely stay away from. Versus, like, because like I said, if everything is haram, then nothing is haram, right? Like, it loses in importance. And at the end of the day, if I start saying, oh, this is haram, eventually what happens is, like, we start giving up, right? As individuals, we're like, man, well, everything's haram anyway. Like, what's the point if everything's haram anyway? Versus giving people space to to navigate, right? So I'm like, no. Okay, listen, if you avoid this and you don't do that, right? Giving people guidelines is actually much easier and healthier because they feel that they can actually find a way out. There's light at the end of the tunnel. But if people come to me and all I do is close the door in their face, what's going to happen? One of two things. Either they're going to give up or they're going to stop coming to me. So we need to make sure that we keep those doors open and that we make things easy for others. So that was a good discussion on towels. Here he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Like he kind of dried himself off and he put the water off of himself. So he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is something that would be considered recommended because he sallallahu alaihi wasallam did it. There's another narration where he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, every time when he would go to shower and he would go to take ghusl, he would call for like the pot where the water was in, and like we had said, when he started it, he would pour the water out left and right. He wouldn't actually he would have put his hands in the vessel until he had washed his hands or he cleaned his hands. We'll stop here, inshallah. Next week we have an iftar for Arafah, so we encourage everyone to attend, inshallah. It'll be in the courtyard. It'll be at Salatul Maghrib. So we will have iftar, we'll have food, and then while we're breaking fast, inshallah, we'll have like a game. So we encourage everyone to attend. Inshallah, we hope it's good. فجزاكم الله خير والله أعلم وصلى الله على خير خلق نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.